What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. So before I get into this video, I want to give a shout out once again to Daryl Sloan for the donation to the channel, coming by showing love once again, and he's become one of the great subscribers in Too Raw history. I mean, always leaving positive comments, always coming by showing love. Much respect to him. You know what I'm saying? Long-time subscriber. Much respect to Daryl Sloan, aka the NBA historian. So salute to him and to anyone else that wants to show love to this channel. If you choose to, you can do so in the links in the description box below via the PayPal or Cash App or in the pinned comment in the comment section below, if you choose to. Now, in this video, I want to make a comparison between two players I don't think I've ever really compared before. Dikembe Mutombo versus Nate Thurmond. Mount Mutombo versus Nate the Great. Who was the better all-around player? Now, this is the thing. If you look at resume, it would appear closer than what it really is. What do I mean by that? Well, Dikembe Mutombo in the 1990s, um, you can make an argument that he reinvigorated the block shot. He reinvigorated it. As the NBA became more and more defensive focused, he was the premier shot blocker of the 1990s. Now, don't get me wrong, there were other guys who were great at blocking shots. You know, you had Theo Ratliff, Alonzo Mourning, Marcus Camby, Sean Bradley. These are some of your great shot blockers. A little bit later on, maybe somebody like Ben Wallace. You had great shot blockers, but Dikembe Mutombo just had a knack for dominating games off of that defensive play alone. I mean, we've seen the sequences when, on some teams he would have 3 or 4 consecutive blocks. He back in 1994 in that series where they upset the Denver Nuggets, they upset the 63-win Sonics in that 5-game first-round series. In that 5-game series, the Ken Mutombo set a record for blocks, if I'm not mistaken, in that series. I think he had something like 30 blocks in a 5-game series, averaging 6 blocks per game. Phenomenal. I think that was the numbers. But if you look at that, if you look at the fact that he won 4 Defensive Player of the Year awards, right? 4 of them, which I believe is tied with Dwight Howard for the most in history. When you look at the all defensive teams he was part of, when you look at all of the all first teams, well, all NBA, all second team, all third teams, and you compare it to Nate Thurmond, you say to yourself, well, he had to be the superior defender. Well, this is where that can be misleading. First of all, the Defensive Player of the Year award didn't start until the early 80s. So there was no award for defensive, exploits or defensive excellence until the early 80s. Now, even if this award was available during Nate Thurmond's time, he still would have had to contend with that award, contend with it with some really great all-time defensive players. I mean, he would have had to contend with that award with Wilt, Bill Russell, who probably would have won it the majority of the time when he was playing. Walt Clyde Frazier's there. as a perimeter defender. So those are some of the premier players that he would have had to contend with. Now, I do see a window after Bill Russell retired, um, after Wilt slowed down, the early 70s, where he could have won that award a couple times. Now, 4 times in his career, I don't know if he would have won it 4 times. However, if you're talking about him being on an all defensive team, he would have been on there a couple of times, most definitely. He would have been on an all defensive team a couple of times. And, like I said, they didn't have these awards back then. So instead of looking at the awards, you kind of look at what they accomplished in their careers. The Dikembe Mutombo was bigger. He was 7'2", 260, 265, versus Nate, who was 6'11". Guess Nate was somewhere around what was Nate, 240? Maybe 240-ish. But Nate he was much more physically imposing. He had the physique when he was younger. Uh, he had the physique of a bodybuilder. He was very strong, and he also had incredibly long fucking arms. I mean, um, his wingspan was actually longer than Wilt Chamberlain. Wilt Chamberlain noticed this when they would tip off for whenever he would oppose Nate and they would be tipping off for the ball. He noticed that Nate's reach was longer than his. This is what helped aid Nate in becoming one of the most dangerous shot blockers in the history of the league. I think that if the shot block was a stat that had been counted since the beginning of the league, or at least since the 50s, I believe that Wilt Chamberlain will be number one, Bill Russell will probably be number two, and I think Nate Thurman will be third all time. I think Nate Thurman is the third greatest shot blocker in the history of the NBA. Unfortunately, like I said, he happened to play at the same time that Wilt and Bill Russell played. But you got to look at what he accomplished. For his career, Nate averaged 15 points and 15 rebounds. A great balance. Mutombo, I think, averaged something around 9 points and 10 rebounds. Good numbers. I believe, look, Dikembe was a really good rebounder who I believe led the league in rebounding maybe twice in his career. Might have been in the early 2000s. Um, Nate actually never led the NBA in rebounding. Interestingly, he never led the league in rebounding. But as I've said time and time again, his career coincided with Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain. If it were not for these two individuals, these two greatest rebounders, he would have led the league in rebounding every year. You look at a couple of years in the mid 60s when he averaged 21 rebounds and 22 rebounds a game. He is the only player to average 20 rebounds in a game other than Wilt Chamberlain, Bill Russell, and I believe Jerry Lucas. They're the only other players to average 20 rebounds in a game, and Wilt and Bill are the only ones that average more. Nate Thurman had 42 rebounds in a game once in 1965. I believe it was against the Baltimore Bullets. No other player other than Bill Russell and Wilt had more rebounds in the game. Bill Russell's career high, I believe, is 51 rebounds. Wilt's 55. Nate Thurman has the record for most rebounds in a quarter. You know what that record is? 18. He had 18 fucking rebounds in a quarter once. I think that was against the Detroit Pistons. Nate is the first player in NBA history to officially have a quadruple double. He did that in his debut with the Chicago Bulls in 1973, I believe. either 73 or 74. And no, I think it was 74. He had a quadruple double. Now, obviously, I don't think he's really the first guy to get a quadruple double, but because he didn't count blocks and steals until 73, 74. But he's credited with that. The one thing that I did find interesting about Dikembe Mutombo and Nate Thurmond that's similar, they both went to one NBA Finals. Mutombo back in 2001 with the Sixers. Nate Thurmond in 1967 with the Golden State Warriors. What's interesting is that they were both defensive anchors on a team with a prolific scorer that ultimately lost to an all-time great team. Dikembe Mutombo was traded for Theo Ratliff to help improve an already great defensive team, and it worked. It was a great trade. And of course, the prolific scorer that he played with was Allen Iverson. They went on that great, unbelievable, great run in the 2001 finals. The playoffs, going to the NBA Finals, ultimately losing to the greatest playoff team in the history of the NBA, in my opinion, the 2001 Lakers. Whereas with Nate Thurmond, he was a defensive anchor of that Warriors team that had Rick Barry at the peak of his powers, averaging over 35 points a game that year. Ultimately, they lose to the 1966-67 Philadelphia 76ers, a team that some people feel was the greatest team of all time. So this is what I come away with. Nate Thurmond was not quite as big as Dikembe Mutombo, but he was stronger, much stronger, more agile. He was quicker. He moved better. Offensively, they weren't great offensive players, but Nate was more aggressive offensively. He was not that efficient. Whereas Dikembe Mutombo, he was not offensively aggressive, but he generally scored most of his points on putbacks and dunks. So therefore, he had a much higher field goal percentage. Nate would take jump shots. Nate was not a guy that just always tried to dunk the basketball. The game was a little bit different back then. The game was a lot different back then. It was, like I said, he was not an accurate scorer. Nate was a better rebounder. Both of them were great rebounders, but Nate was even better. Nate's all-time great rebounder. Mutombo is an excellent rebounder. Mutombo is one of the all-time great shot blockers. All-time great. Nate was just a little bit better. Nate was just, like I said, one of the most prolific shot blockers ever. If I were to put Mutombo at 98 as far as block rating, if he's 98, Nate Thurmond's like 99.5. I'll put it to you like that. Neither one of them were great free throw shooters from what I can recall. They weren't the absolute worst, but I don't think Nate nor Dikembe were great. I think they were somewhere in the 60s as far as free throw percentage. Nate was just more dominant overall. You could even argue that Mutombo was a little bit one-dimensional at times. He was, a guy that could give you rebounds, block shots. He was a great defensive presence, but he wasn't a great all-around center. Like he wasn't a great passer from the post. Nate was a great passer. I don't recall Dikembe being the greatest screen setter. Nate was a great screen setter. Um, like I said, one thing I remember about Mutombo that used to annoy me is he had this habit of when he used to, like whenever a player would dump the ball off to him in the post, he would always have this annoying habit of he would get the ball, he would try to gather himself, he would go down with it, and then come back up. And I always thought, man, you're wasting so much time doing it. You know, I always thought he wasted so much time. I guess that was just him. That's what he did. Um, but yeah, overall, Nate was the superior player, in my opinion. His best years, 1963 to 1974, he averaged 18.6 points, 17.6 rebounds, and 3 assists per game. Just an all around dominant player who is, like Mutombo, underrated. I love both of these guys, man. I love both of them. I would just say, though, I just think Nate the Great was a little bit greater, you know? But not to say that the Dikembe Mutombo wasn't a force to be reckoned with either. So that's pretty much how I see it. Tell me what you guys think.